Let's suppose you've created a logo and you've saved it as an SVG, which is a scalable vector graphic, or you just have some text and you want to elevate it while representing the logo or the text. So in this video, I'll teach you 3 different ways in which all you have to do is add a plane in the background and mess around with a few settings to create stunning results and just help elevate your minimalistic designs. For each of the methods, I'll talk about the pros and the cons so that you can decide which one suits your needs the best. And hence, let's actually start the tutorial. The first thing that you'd have to do is actually bring in your logo. So you can delete the default cube and press File, Import SVG. Then you can select your logo. In this case, I've imported a cat SVG that I got off of Pixabay. So I'll rotate it on x-axis by 90 degrees and then scale it up to make it much larger. Next, just select one of the curves. Maybe you can select the initial first curve, followed by selecting everything else and pressing Ctrl J to join all of them into a single curve that you just selected. Now you can rename this to cat, and you can also select its material. So it comes with the default SVG material. I don't want that, so I'm gonna press minus to remove it and add in a new material. I'll call that cat material and leave that as is for now. Next up, let's suppose it is just a text that you're using, or your logo is accompanied by some text. So we'll press Shift A and add in a text, rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees, press tab to change it to whatever you want. So in this case, I'll say cat, and I'll go to the text properties and change the font to whatever I want. And while I'm at it, I'll go down to the alignment and change the vertical alignment to middle. Then I can just grab it on the x-axis and bring it to the side. Press 1 to go into your front view so that you can do this more precisely, and just move everything around till you're happy with the positioning. Once you're happy with the positioning, the first thing that you'd have to do is add in your camera. So press Ctrl-Alt-0 to snap camera to your current location, select the camera, and just make changes in the object data properties over here till you're happy with the positioning of the camera. Once you're happy with the positioning of everything, you can start off with the first method, which is adding a reflective plane in the background. For reflections to work, you have to go to your render properties and switch on screen space reflections. And because reflections are generally going to be done with some sort of emissive material, you can also switch on bloom. And since you don't want to overpower the bloom, you can always clamp it to some value, maybe 4, and also reduce the intensity, maybe 0.03. And with that, let's actually add in the background plane for the reflections to occur. So press Shift A, Mesh, Plane, and just scale the plane up. And you can't really see it from this angle, so you can come out of the camera view to see how much you scaled it, and clearly that was way too large. So maybe a size like this is fine. Then rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees and just grab it on the y-axis to move it back by just a little bit. Now that it's behind the text, you can press 0 to go back to your camera view, and you can start off by hiding the light temporarily because we don't need it for this particular scene. And to see the changes, you can change your viewport display from solid to rendered. Then you can select your cat object and just go to the material properties, go down to the emission and increase it all the way to white, and increase the strength to maybe something like 3, just so that you get some bloom. Similarly, for the actual text object, you can give it the same cat material or a slightly different material if you please. However, right now you can see we still don't see any reflections, even though we have screen space reflections switched on in the back. To fix that, there's 2 things that we have to do. The first thing is actually selecting the background plane and adding a new material for it and increasing the metallicness all the way to 1 or something very close to 1. Along with that, you can reduce the roughness to get a more sharp reflection at the back. Now, if you grab it on the y-axis and move it further behind, you can see how the reflections also change. For now, I'll keep it somewhere like this, and I will also increase the roughness to maybe 0.3 just to make it a lot softer, which I think looks better in most situations. Along with that, based on the base color, the actual amount of reflections will change. So if the base color is white, it'll have the maximum amount of reflections. And if you start decreasing the value and making it darker, if you make it all the way to black, there won't be any screen space reflections. So make sure that the base color is kept as white. If you don't want it to actually appear white, make sure that the light is switched off, and you can go to the world properties and change the background color all the way to black. And that way your background remains completely black, but you still get really nice reflections. Similarly, you can always take the background, rotate it about some axis to just change the location of the reflections a bit, which adds a little bit more to the effect. You also have a lot of settings that you can play around with to get this reflection to be exactly how you want, such as going to the actual render properties, expanding screen space reflections, and increasing the thickness, which you can clearly see what it does. In my case, however, I'll keep the thickness down to the minimum value that it gets to, and I'll also keep the trace precision fairly low. And with that, you can also add in a texture to the background plane. For that, you can just create a new window by clicking and dragging from the junction of two windows, switching over to the shader editor, and with the plane selected, we can add in a texture for the roughness. So press Shift-A and search for a noise texture, and press Shift-A and search for a color ramp, and plug this color into the factor of the color ramp, bring the black in, and I don't want any situation to be completely reflective. So I'll select the black and increase the value to something like 0.2. And I also don't want any area to be completely non-reflective. So I'm going to select the white and reduce this value to something like 0.6. After that, I can Control Shift click the color ramp with the node wrangler switched on to preview it. And right now everything seems like it's a single color, and that's because the scale is too low. If I increase the scale to something much larger, so let's go with a scale of 50, you can see what it currently looks like. And I can play around with the color ramp a little bit more to increase the contrast, and then plug this color into the roughness and Control Shift click the principled BSDF to see how the reflections now have some sort of a texture to it. Again, you can always play around with the scale just to give it this nice grunge-like texture, and play around with the detail and roughness as well if you please. The best part about using this method is that if you change the color of the actual emissive object, the color of the shadow at the back or reflection at the back also changes. So if I make this a nice blue cat, even the reflection becomes blue as well. And if I want this to be more desaturated, I can always go ahead and increase the emission strength and it becomes whiter. So that's one method of doing this, and it looks really cool if you have animations like this particular one over here. And with that, we can come to the second method of creating these backgrounds, which is using ambient occlusion. To use ambient occlusion, the first thing that you need to do is go to the world properties and make sure that the color is set all the way to white. Ambient occlusion works best when the color of the background or the world is white. We also don't require this plane. I'll call this reflective plane, and I'll just hide it for the time being. Now, I'll press Shift-A to add in a new plane, rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees, just come out of the camera view, grab it and move it just behind the plane, and scale it up as much as I want. Next, to switch on ambient occlusion, you can go to your render properties and check this ambient occlusion box. After that, you can increase the distance to make sure that no matter how far this back plane is, the ambient occlusion still occurs. And to actually see the ambient occlusion even better, increase the factor beyond 1. So you can go up to something like 10 and you can start seeing the ambient occlusion actually occurring. Along with that, we don't need this to be as emissive as it is right now, because that way we get this border of light as well due to the emission and the bloom. To remove this colorful border, you can always switch off bloom, and that way you get only the ambient occlusion. Now, the best part about the ambient occlusion is that it works with the background plane no matter what the color is. So you can give the background plane its own material, and if you change the color all the way to black, you see the ambient occlusion is still occurring. Along with that, to see only the ambient occlusion and not the screen space reflections, you can also switch off screen space reflections over here. And this is how it looks with just ambient occlusion. If you want, you can have the background plane a complete white as well. And you can have your original text object as a complete black by making the emission color black and the base color black as well. And you still get these really nice soft ambient occlusion happening all around it. If you want a little bit more softness, you can grab the black plane and just move it further away, and the ambient occlusion becomes even softer. If you want to increase the effect of the ambient occlusion, you can actually make the plane more metallic. So as you increase the metallic, the ambient occlusion also increases. So just grab it on the Y and move it as far back as you want to play around with the ambient occlusion. However, if you feel like it's getting far too dominating, you can always reduce the factor back in your render properties. So in this case, I'll reduce the factor to 2, and that looks pretty good. So this would work really well when you're zoomed in and things like that. So it's just worth playing around with. Along with that, you can always rotate the plane around on like the x-axis and things like that to just get different distributions of this ambient occlusion. So you can see if I rotate it on the x-axis by like this minus 51 degrees, this is the type of ambient occlusion that we're getting. And I think that looks pretty good when you render it with really high samples. And with that, we can come to our last method, which is using normal shadows. It's the most common method, but let's see how we can do with that. For that, I'm going to take this ambient occlusion plane and hide it as well, and then press Shift-A, Mesh, Plane, RX90, and just scale it up as well, and grab it on the Y-axis to move it just behind our logo and text. Then we can switch off ambient occlusion so that we see only the effect of the shadows. First thing is, to get shadows, you require a light source. So let's unhide this light source that we had and press Alt-G to clear its location. Then we can grab it on the Y-axis to bring it back, and you can already see how the shadows come in. Now, you can go to the world properties and change the color down to black to make the shadows more black. But if you want the shadows to be lighter, just go ahead and increase the color of the world background. The next thing is, if you don't want this light to be so bright in the center, you can select the plane, give it a new material, and reduce the color all the way to black. And you can also increase the roughness all the way to 1 so that the light is distributed evenly on it. Similarly, on the actual cat material, you can increase the roughness so that the light is distributed evenly on that material as well. Then you can play around with the base color for each of these. So for example, the cat material, I can make the base color white, and this is what we have. However, the problem with this is that the shadow quality is generally not that great. You can see how blocky it is, and to fix that, you can go to your render properties, go all the way down to your shadows, expand it, and increase the cube size to the max value there is, and immediately the shadows become much better. You can do the same thing with the cascade size as well. However, it might be too sharp for your liking. So to fix that, you can select the light and go to the light properties here and increase the radius. As long as you have soft shadows ticked, you should start getting slightly softer shadows. However, I don't really like this method of creating soft shadows in Eevee, because Eevee fakes the soft shadows by adding in multiple point lights within the radius of this single light, and that creates multiple shadows, and Eevee tries to just accumulate those shadows as one single soft shadow. But clearly, as you increase the radius, you can see each shadow individually, and that just doesn't look like a soft shadow or realistic in any way, and I generally don't like that method. However, you can always keep the radius fairly small, maybe 0.3, and then take the plane at the back and move it even further away to add in these nice shadows. The best part about this is that you have complete control over exactly where the shadows are going to form by playing around with the light. So you can select the light and just grab it on maybe the x-axis, and you can see how by moving the light towards the left, you get the shadow towards the right, and you can have the shadow slowly move to the left by moving the light to the right. So this reacts instantly with the light and can be very useful to create cinematic logo, intros, and things like that. However, the use cases are completely up to you, and you're free to play around with this howsoever you please. Remember, if you increase the metallicness all the way to 1, the shadows become much harder to see in this particular situation. So for the best results, keep your world lighting fairly low and your metallic value low as well, with your roughness as high as you can. You can also have the base color all the way to white and the actual cat color all the way to black. And to get shadows in regions closer to the actual text, you can go to the actual light object and go to the light properties, expand shadow, and switch on contact shadows. And that way, even those areas will get their shadows. So you can see without contact shadows, there's a little bit of light leaking through over there. And with contact shadows, it goes off completely. So those are just situations and controls that you have control over to play around with to get all of these different results to elevate your creations to the next level. So hopefully you learned something from this video, and you can apply this to not just texts and logos, but any object, to be honest. If you liked the video, be sure to check out other videos on my channel, because I'm sure you'll find something or the other that you find useful and interesting, or just inspiration to create your own animations. I release videos every single day, so stay tuned for the next one coming up tomorrow. And until that does, comment your questions down below, because I will answer all of them for as long as I can. And until then, keep creating and stay creative.